tonight. Tonight we are going to take React a little bit deeper, and we're going to talk about that. Another thing that's like state, but not quite like state. Oh, I didn't see any comments whatsoever. View responses. Oh, geez. Okay, well, Polly is acting up and not showing me my responses. There we go. Nothing yet. So far, so good. Breaking up into smaller components. We're going to do that tonight. Okay. Adding conditionals, we're going to do later. We're not worried about that right now. We will get there. Updating state using click events. We are going to talk about that. Oh, we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. Yeah, for sure. Okay, got most of it. What makes something a component or not? We'll definitely talk about that tonight. We are not talking about extends React.component until next unit. So that is a class component, and we are not dealing with those during this unit. So don't worry about that quite yet. All of its use state and all of its uses. Well, we certainly don't have any. We certainly don't have an example of all of its uses, nor would we expect you to know all of its uses at the moment. But use state is one of those things where we're going to use it a lot, and the more we use it, the better the understanding you'll have. Okay, let's see. Multiple JavaScript files. That's tonight. How can we do a function that works for all the buttons from our last project? We'll build something like that tonight, but that's more kind of, it's not advanced, but that's kind of on a case-by-case basis, how that works. But we'll build something very similar to that tonight. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Polly used to do that right in line. Okay, cool, got it all. It is an NES Mini, and it's also an SNES Mini behind it. So that's about the extent of my gaming these days. Okay, so let's get started tonight. In Slack, I would like you to, in your own words, write what React is. And the main goal of React. What's the main goal of React? And just write it in your own words. I want to hear what all of you have to say. Ooh, I like all of these so far. Library for rendering UI components, to simplify JavaScript processes, simplify front-end development, front-end development used to write dry code, fast, scalable, simple, JavaScript library, simplify the writing of code. Let's see, UI, get a job at Facebook, maybe. Let's see, ooh, JavaScript debugging easier, large apps possible, I like that. JavaScript library for building UI interfaces. That's a long one. Okay, UI library. I kind of want to squash this idea, and I guess you could take that and take it in a couple of ways. This idea of simplifying code. React isn't simple by any means, right? We've gone through one lesson. We're going to go to our second. We literally have 2 full units of Lambda School based purely on React. And so I don't want you to think that it's it's more simple than writing vanilla JavaScript, because sometimes writing vanilla JavaScript is way easier than setting up an entire React application. But it does make complex parts of JavaScript simple to write. It does make like things that would take a long time easier to write, as long as you know React, right? React is easier for me to write than vanilla JavaScript because I know React really well, right? So I can bust out some stuff with React super fast. And I can bust out stuff with vanilla JavaScript, but the things I want to do when I build a React application are difficult to write in vanilla JavaScript. So that being said, it is simplified. So kind of two different ideas right there. A lot of you wrote something about a UI library, and that's correct, right? That's exactly what React says they are, as a UI library. And essentially, I was thinking about it today. React is designed specifically to create UI components, so to create visual things on the screen, and to update those components based on some changing or dynamic data. All right. And so that is React's one and only job. That is what React sets out to do, and they do it well. So they are going to allow us to build these components, build these visual things that we see on the screen, allow us to plug some data into those components, and then it takes care of updating everything and changing based on the data that is coming in. And what we're going to talk about tonight is a very important part of that process. We haven't talked about it quite yet, which is props. So I really love seeing all of your answers to this, because a lot of times when we learn these kind of new technologies, and it's like, oh, we're at Lambda and we need to learn this to be a developer, and we're like, why? Why do we need to learn this? What does this have to do? And so getting your head around, like, what is this library or framework or technology aiming to achieve? And if it's not making our lives easier or better as developers, then there's no point. And so I always think when you were learning stuff, like, what is this? What is it even trying to do? How is this going to help me? And a good practice to keep up as you go and as you learn, because learning don't stop at Lambda. So it continues on for the rest of your development careers. So let's jump into it tonight. Where is my screen? There it is. Cool. Ooh, this looks familiar, right? We have a blank. I'm gonna talk about this imports and stuff later. For right now, and actually, no, I'm not gonna talk about it later. I'm gonna do it right now. No, I'm gonna talk about them later, but I'm gonna. All right. And let's get rid of that. Okay. So and how's my screen size for everyone? Cool. Okay. Okay. So we're going to build this counter app really fast from last time. All right. This is just going to be a quick review of what we did last time. And we're going to talk about state in a little bit more depth, hopefully. Okay. Yeah, that works for me. I'm going to close that a little bit, close this a little bit. Okay. And then we're going to look at some cool new stuff. Okay, so we are already rendering something to the screen, right? What is this? Yeah, I'll just say, what is this? What am I writing on the screen here? Of course, it's going to do that for me. Yes, this is JSX, right? This looks like HTML, but it is JSX, okay? So let's check it out. We have a simple function. This is a regular old JavaScript function. That's the beautiful thing about React too, in a lot of ways. We use some React magic here and there, but most React is just JavaScript. It's simple, basic, what we know is JavaScript, okay? So just keep that in mind. So we have a simple function. We've named our function app. We've got some parens there. We've got some curly brackets, and we are returning some JSX. All right. So when we call React DOM.render, remember, we'll probably never write that in our lives, but it'll be on your screen, and you will be messing with this a little bit in more advanced stuff. But when we call React DOM render, we give it some JSX. What is React DOM.render doing with that JSX? What is it doing with that? I did save it. Ooh, we got a lot of things here. Putting it on the virtual DOM? Yep, it is. And then appending it to the actual DOM too. Appending to the anchor element, yeah. Converting it to JavaScript, I like that, Alan. Okay, inserting the app in the first argument, location in the second argument. Yep, we've got our root element, right? Our DOM element, our real DOM element, not our virtual DOM, our real DOM element. And we're saying, hey, go install the entire virtual DOM on that element as a child. Okay. Oh, there it is. Calling function app. Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, so it's calling that function. React sees that this is JSX and it is an uppercase app, so it knows that it's a component, and it's calling this function, okay? And what is this function returning to us? It's returning a React element, which is a div, which has a class name of counter. And it's putting that on the virtual DOM and then putting it on a root element. So all this is doing too is calling this element, right? Remember, JSX is just a fancy way of writing JavaScript that looks like HTML. It makes it so that we web developers that know HTML can write something that looks like HTML. We write this a lot better than React.create element, right? I know I do. I know that probably all of you feel much more comfortable writing HTML than writing a bunch of create element methods, right? So that's what JSX is doing for us. We have to always keep in our minds, and I'm going to reiterate this like 1,000 more times, and you're all going to get so sick of it. But this is not HTML. This is JavaScript, okay? And that the sooner that you really wrap your head around that, the easier this what we're going to talk about today is going to come to you. So return, yes. So if you just have a single line return, you can just write it on a single line. We're not going to have a single line return. We are going to build a component. All right. So, and Code Sandbox here is using a linter called Prettier. If you are, I highly suggest everyone download Prettier for VS Code. If you are using VS Code, I'm sure that there are packages for every other IDE and text editor out there as well. But it's called Prettier, and it's actually the greatest, one of the best things I've ever started using because it makes your code format to a very specific way. So if you ever see like me save it and then all of a sudden my code switches around, that's Prettier going through and reformatting my code to make it this one very specific way to write code. Cool. We do need an index.html document, Blake. And our index.html is in our public folder here. There it is right there, okay? And we'll talk about what the public folder is and what the source folder are a later time and why we have two different folders and why that index isn't in our source folder. But for now, it's in our public folder at all times, okay? And like I said, pretty rare that you would ever go into your HTML file once you're dealing with React. Cool. Close that. So, oh my gosh, Code Sandbox is not playing nice today. All right. I'm going to build our counter out. So if we remember from last time, we had an H1, and we're going to call this React counter now. Okay, there we go. Make that a little bit bigger. Nope, not going to fit on one line. Okay. We had our H1. We had a paragraph. Ooh, it doesn't work. Okay, let's see if it did. And this paragraph had the current total is, and let's set it to 0 for right now. And remember, this was wrapped in a span. And our paragraph also had a class on it. What attribute do we use for classes when we're in JSX? Yeah, just remember class name. If not, React will yell at you. You'll remember, and then you can change it. Okay. So now we're going to call this click description. All right. We're going to create another div. This is going to have a class name of button container. And inside this button container, we are going to have 3 buttons. Okay. We are going to have, and we are going to use the button element. Why are we going to use the button element and not a div element? Anyone know why? We can just style a div element to look like a button. That works. Semantic. Why does semantic matter to us? We can add an on click to literally anything. Just so you know. Yeah, I mean, I think the semantic thing are, oh my gosh, the semantic thing is the #1 reason. And Jennifer, I think, got it right now, is the accessibility. And, you know, it just, this is a button, right? We have elements that are what they are, right? We are not, yeah, you know, we know HTML. We don't have to write everything as a div and make it look like something. We can just write the actual thing. And then when accessibility reasons too, right? Screen readers are going to read that as something that is clickable. Every single thing on this page is clickable, but buttons have this built-in stuff. Okay. Yeah, you Robert, you joke, but most of the websites you go to, I'm going to say, are built purely with divs, and it's dumb. So make sure that when you go to the job, you fight for semantic HTML, and for accessibility reasons, if only, right? But it's also for us, like, oh, I don't have to go search for that button. I know exactly where it is, right? So, all right, soapbox over. We're going to go add 1. On this one, we're going to go multiply 5. And on this one, we're going to say reset, right? I'm just reading all Slack right now. Yes. Okay. So look at this. We have our page. Our UI is set up, right? I wrote a bunch of what looks like HTML, but it's really JavaScript with a mask on. Okay. But since we know how to write HTML, we could write this pretty fast, much faster than writing, you know, const container equals react dot create element div, you know, etc. Class name, blah blah blah, children here, right? I can write this way faster than I can write this. Okay, so that's why JSX is great, in my opinion. Okay, so let's. What are we going to do next? What do we need now? Now that we have all of our visual stuff set up, what do we need to worry about? Functionality, clicks, events. We don't really have anything to do with events yet. Like if I wrote it on click, what would we do with our on click? I said on click. All right, I'm going to do something. What are we going to do in here? Yes. So what we need to do is remember when I said earlier, React's sole purpose is to build UI based on and change it and react to data. So we need to build our data first, okay? Honestly. So let's get our data, and then when we have our data, then we can start manipulating that data, all right? So I'm going to grab our use state hook, and I'm going to use it. Let's say we want to call this piece of state total. Who can help me write out this line 8 here to set state to 0 and then to use that total? This is probably I think this is probably one of the trickier things from last week is last lesson. It's understanding why we do it this pattern. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to write const. Can I write let if I wanted to? I can. That's totally fine. But const, because we know it's not changing. I'm going to give it an array. This is how I always write it, by the way. You can write it step by step if you'd like. And then I'm going to use state. I'm going to set my state to 0. And then I'm going to name my state. So I'm going to name it total. And I'm going to name it set total. I love this. Every single person on here, okay. There's a couple of people on here that have a little bit different names to it. Totally fine. If I wanted to call this score and set score, that's absolutely okay. It's up to me now as a developer to call this what I want. One thing is always call it one thing, and then the function, call it set that thing, camel case, okay? That's just one thing to keep in mind. I'm going to call it total and set total. What is total? We can use strings for that state, Jeremy. Yep, and we're actually going to see that today. Like at a much higher level, I don't care like what the value of total is. What is this piece of data? It is our initial state, but more importantly, it's our current state. Okay, this will always represent. This will always represent the current state. Always, always, always. Current state. That's not how you spell current. Current state. Right. The first item in this array is our current state. So right now it's at 0. If I change it to something else, it will then reflect that current version of state. Okay, keep that in mind. And then what's the second item in the array? Yeah, it's a way for us to change that state. So if you want to think of it as a setter, those of you that are familiar with setters, it is a setter. It is a function. It allows us to change the current state to whatever we want, right? So function that allows us to change state. Okay. So those are the two items we get back from our useState array. We get our current state, and then we get a function that allows us to change the state. Okay. Can I ever change the current state? Can I say total equals 15? Ever, 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 ever. Never. Do not do this. All right. We're going to get an error from it anyways. Total is read only. This is current state is read only. We cannot set this only by using that function. Okay. Keep that in mind, because there's going to be some point, and it gets a little tricky when things get a little bit more complex, where it might not seem like you're trying to mutate state on purpose, but you are. So keep that in mind. Like total, that first item can never be mutated, can never be changed. You have to use that function to change it. All right. Where do I want to put this total right now? Where should I use the current state? Yeah, where the 0 is in the span. So how do I put this into here? Why am I writing an object in here? I'm writing an object here. Why am I doing that? I'm actually not writing an object. This is just JSX syntax, okay? So really, we're going to see something today where we're actually going to put an object inside of there, and it looks real funky and weird. So just remember that these outer are JSX saying, hey, we are going to put raw vanilla JavaScript in here, okay? And since this is pure JavaScript, I can just write the name of my variable. React is now going to take that variable, say, hey, what does that equal? Oh, it equals 0, so I'm going to put a 0 in there, okay? That's what React is doing for us through JSX. All right, so remember that the curly brackets mean JavaScript. Cool, so our current total is 0. Yeah, but that's what it was before. Let's change it. Now we know, now we can see that this element is showing our current value of state, okay? And those that asked if we can put a string in there, sure, you can put a string in there, right? You can put a Boolean in there if you want. It's not gonna show up, but we'll use that later. Put an array. I don't know if an array will show up either. Put an object. Object will get mad at us for reasons that we'll explore later. But let's just stick with numbers and strings for right now. We're going to stick with 0. Whew. All right. We're almost there where we have this. Component almost built. What do we need to do now? What's the final thing we need to do? Yeah, we need to give these buttons their events. And why are we giving these buttons their events? What are we going to do in these on clicks? A high level. I don't need the exact details. What are we going to do in these on clicks? Yeah, we're going to change total. We're gonna change the state. Okay, math. Yep. We're gonna change our state. We're going to make this counter, this wonderful billion-dollar startup idea here. We're gonna make this usable. Right. Right now it's not usable. Okay. We're gonna make it usable. So let's go into our first on click, and we want to add 1. So I'm gonna go total equals total plus 1, right? It gets mad at me. Total is read only. Remember, don't ever put a single equal when we're talking about state, okay? How am I going to then change this state? Yeah, we are going to use our function that allows us to change the state, right? So it's set total. And what argument does set total take? Set total takes one argument. This function, no matter what it is, no matter what it's called, takes one argument. And what is that argument? I don't really, what I'm looking for, yeah, and you're all correct. What I'm looking for is it takes the new state we want to set it to. So this is going to be called something else in a minute, right? You're going to write 5 million use states in your, probably the next 16 weeks. They're all going to be called something different. But you just need to know that this function is always going to take whatever we want our new state to be, okay? So we want it to be whatever the total is plus 1. So now let's go look. There we go. Let me ask you a question. Why can't I write it like this? Without too many loops. Why, other than infinite loop, why can't I write it like this? See our on click in here? Anyone know why? Just write it in there. Like on click, I just want to set the total to total plus 1. These are all great answers. On click takes a callback, right? When we click on something, it's going to call that callback. On click actually will call this. This is, how do I explain this? Well, we are calling this callback. Like we are calling this function right here. Right? This is not something that onClick is calling. If I write a function and I write the parens on it, I am actually calling that function. Okay, onClick isn't. And because of that, it's just going to update it. And what happens when we update our state? We're going to re-render the component, and it's going to call it again, update it, re-render the component, call it again. That's why we get this infinite loop. So if we're going to set our state like this, we need to wrap that in an actual callback function. Okay. So now this function is wrapped around it. Now when I click it, it calls this function, and this function calls that other function. Okay. That's something that every single one of you is going to run into at some point, and just keep this in mind. All right. So yes. All right. So let's go and add these to our other methods or our other buttons. All right, they're going to add 1 now instead. What do we want our multiply by 5? We want total times 5. And our reset, we're just going to do it to 0. You can do total minus total if you want. That like totally works. Totally works. Or you can just write 0. Remember, whatever we put in here is what it's going to change our state to. So even though Dan is not a number, it's going to change our state to that. Okay, so you have to be careful. Benedict, if this is just outside of this anonymous function, it's just like doing this. Okay, and we're going to get the same thing in infinite loop. We have to wrap this in a function in order for it to wait to call it. But yes. All right. We literally did 2 hours worth of lectures from Tuesday in like 30 minutes right now. So correct, Benedict. Yes. All right. So you are all masters of creating React components now. In 5 minutes, we're going to really create some components. and we're gonna break things apart, and we're gonna build reusable stuff because this ain't reusable right here, right? So let's take a 5-minute break. If you have any questions, throw them into Slack. I'll be back in 5, and we're gonna start building crazy components. All right, see you in 5. Come on back. Let's start taking a big old axe and wrecking ball to our component here. Okay, so let's talk about this and let's talk about components in general. Um, is what we have here reusable? Is this dry? Question for you all. No, it's not. This is like this is like us writing our component last week without the function. Okay, the function for us here is allowing React to render this stuff, but we could actually just do this if we wanted to. Craziness about to ensue. Because we don't have our totals and stuff. We don't have our state in here, so we can't do this. But if we weren't using state, we could just throw this whole thing into our render, and it would just render it for us. So we need to think about our app here in terms of components. All right. So we, in our other, before we started, we had this this div that app was returning, and we've just right now just put counter in here. For the most part, you are going to be writing more than one thing for your screen. Okay. And so what I would like us to do is to break our app here into a component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this our counter component. And I can just do function notation counter. And then I'm going to take all of this. I'm going to put it in our counter. We're going to break it. Oh no, I meant to X that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to return a div. And this div is going to have all of our components in it. Okay. So where we are including one component on our render, what we want to do is we want to have one main app component. And this app component is going to contain all of our child components. All right. And so if I wanted to, remember, all I did was copy paste that whole thing we just built into a new function and called it counter. So if I wanted to render this counter inside of app here, how would I do that? Ooh, props, counter, call it. So I probably could do this. It did, it worked. But remember, just like how we called app down here, React will do that for us. The thing is, I don't know. Yeah, it will work. That's crazy. Yeah, that's cool. So I could do that if I wanted to. But the JSX way of doing it is to just write an open tag, give the name of the component, and a close tag. And now our counter is running in here. All right. And now this thing is reusable. All right. I want to scroll down here. We have two counters here. Okay. That's a total of 0, and that's a total of 0. When I click on add one, or is only one of these going to change, or are both of them going to change? Give me one or both. Give me a thumbs up for one, a thumbs down for two, if you can see mine. All right, so thumbs up and a thumbs. Oh, I don't even have the thumbs down on my frequently used. Thumbs down for two, for both. So thumbs up for one, Thumbs down for both. All right, so I'm going to say that that thumbs up is leading only because it was up there a little bit longer. But we are approaching the 50-50 mark. Oh, we are 50-50 now. I love this. All right, so half of you say it's going to, only one of these is going to change. Half of you say that both are going to change. Let's click on it. Drum roll. Only one changes. Why does only one change? That's crazy. Why is only one of these changing? Ah, thank you, Alex. Limited scope, right? When we say counter here, React is calling this function. It is essentially building a brand new counter, and in it, it's building brand new state. And you're going to think to yourself, like, what? Like, that's called total. You can't have two variables called total. Remember, this is in a function level scope. So this only exists within this function. So this state only exists within this component. This state only exists within this component. When I reset one, it does not reset both. Okay. So we now have, as Benedict said, a reusable component. Okay, so remember when I said prettier is going to mess my thing up. So it's just the way it's going to write it. We now have a reusable component. We don't need two of them, but just to know we have that. Yes. Okay, so let's go and look through our code and let's look into our counter. And what is something that we are using multiple times that we could possibly reuse? Yeah. Well, no, well, set total. We're calling set total. We're not creating set total 3 times. But yes, our buttons, okay. We're creating 3 buttons in here. And really, they only have a little bit of difference between the 3 of them. We can programmatically create a button component. So let's do that. Say const. I'll say a function because that's what we've been using. Button. And then we are going to say return. And I am going to do this. Ooh, and I'm going to take this out. And I'm going to take this out. Okay, so essentially what we have here is we have, and I'm just going to replace all of these. And I'm sorry, I'm going to delete some code. But you already have this code from Monday. And I'm going to create this 3 buttons. And you'd be like, but Dan, there's nothing inside of them and they don't do anything. That's correct. We're going to figure out how to do that in just a minute. So let's go look at it real quick. We have our app. Our app is like the big head honcho. This is the component that contains all other components. This is the component that we are going to render to our app. Okay, we're going to render to the HTML. This component should contain all components in it, right? So we see that it's returning a div with this counter component rendered. All right. So React sees this and it says, oh, hey, that's a component. I already know what that is. So I'm going to call that function. So it calls this function, and this is returning some JSX. And inside of it, it sees, hey, there's 3 other components in here. I'm going to call that, and I'm going to put in here whatever is returned from there. So it's going to put in that right in there. All right. Before we talk about props, we are going to talk a little bit. Any questions right now on breaking these components out? We kind of just went from we're going to write everything in our app to now we have 3 different functions that are all returning something different, and we're using those in our JSX, right? We've never done that before. We kind of did that down here on Wednesday or Tuesday, but we've never done this. Okay. Do you also see why it's important to have uppercase components? Because I can look in here and be like, those are components. You know, this is just JSX that represents HTML. That's definitely a component. Okay. Any questions right now on this? We're about to do that right now, Ryan. Yes, they would. Yeah, and we're going to do that in a minute, Benedict. So the button component is merely returning all of the stuff that all three buttons used. There's two things that these buttons used that differentiated them, and we're going to show that in a moment. But this button is just returning what that code that we were not being dry with, right? All right, let's talk about imports and exports. I'm going to come into this data file. In here, and we're going to use these button values. In here have, this is a separate file. We have, for the most part, I don't think we've used separate JavaScript files at all yet. So in here, I've got a const. We've calling it button values, and it's an array. Okay. Never mind what's in this array. Just worry about that it's an array and it's a variable. If I want to access this data in my index file, what will I need to do to it? I'll need to import it, right? We've already started using imports a little bit. We didn't really know how they're being used, why they're being used. So I'm going to come right under this React because I'm going to do two imports here. So I'm going to say import. So I say import, and what am I going to say now? What am I going to put next? Sure, I'll call it data. Data. And then I'm going to say from. So import and from are keywords. We have to understand that we can't use import or from anywhere else, right? Just like class and class name, we can't use import or from. So we're going to say import something from somewhere. And to write the somewhere, we are going to use the file system. Those of you that are familiar with traversing the file system with your terminal, how do I say in the same folder that I'm in? So single dot / means same folder that I'm in. Okay. That means same folder that I'm in. If I say double dots, that means the parent folder. Okay. The parent folder is the main project folder, and we don't want to go up there. So the single folder that I'm in, and then I'm going to write the name of the file I want to access. Okay. So you are going to be traversing the file system a lot with React, but we're going to take it slow at first. All right. The first thing is the folder that I'm in, the name of the file I want to access. Okay. JavaScript, and more specifically Node, which is running through, you don't need the .js. It automatically sees that and it says, hey, that's a JavaScript file. You can put .js if you want, or you can not, whatever you're more comfortable with, but you're not going to see it used. So why does this just say from React? Where's that coming from? Look at that. We see React, we see React DOM, right? We see, but now under here we got styles.css. So yeah, React DOM are dependencies. They are being imported from npm or Yarn, and if and there's actually a transpiler underneath working for all of us in React scripts called Webpack. If Webpack sees this, it says, oh, hey, I know that's a dependency. If it sees this, then it's like, oh, I know that's a file. Let me go look for that file. So there's two different things. We're going to be focusing on files right now. You tend to separate your dependencies from your file imports. Okay, so I'm going to console log data. And what should I see? I'm even surprised I see this blank object. Okay. Well, we haven't quite gotten there yet. All right. Because in our data.js file here, we aren't doing anything with this. We need to explicitly export this variable. All right. So trust me, you're going to get very used to this pattern. You will use it a lot, but right now it might seem a little confusing. So the file I'm trying to get something from, I need to export this because I could have 4 million lines of code and I only want to export one thing. Okay, so I'm going to write export on here. And now we see that our console has turned to undefined. Well, there's a reason, and it's because there are two types of exports. Two types of exports. And we can see those two types of exports right here. So we have what's called a default export, which we can give that any name we want. React is going to force us to call it React, but we could import it as anything we wanted to. And then in these brackets here, we have what's called a named export. And this means that it is, we have to call it by the name that it's being exported as. I know this is confusing. It'll come to you. All right. So if I say export default, oh, okay. That's getting mad at me. I'm gonna take the const out. I'm gonna take that out. What? Let's see. Where am I going wrong here? I'm gonna take that out. Export default button values. There we go. Export default, things in line, it gets a little funky. All right, so I said export default, and I am exporting the button values. So coming into here, now we see that our button values are there. The object, the array of the objects is there, okay? Can I call this anything I want? Export default doesn't like const or let. Yeah, I can call this whatever I want. Dan's button values. Nope, no explanation. And then I can come down here. And there we go. I can call it whatever I want. Because it's a default export, I can call it anything I want, okay? So let's then do something else. I'm going to say const, what's something I could export? Whatever, my name. Ugh, I hate it. And Frehner. Can I export default two things? No, I cannot. Export default can only be one thing, okay? It could be an array of things, right? It could be an object, but it can only be one thing. I can only export default one thing. So keep that in mind. But I can export regular as many things as I want. So this is named, and this is default. So when I just export something, I have to use this name, okay? And so I can see, I'm going to use the curly brackets, and I'm going to say my name. And then let's just come in here and go my name. And now we see that I'm importing my name. Can I call this anything I want? Yeah, Benedict, default is the thing that it doesn't like, the inline const. So I will say for right now, for your sake, no, you can't call this anything you want. You have to call it by its original name, but you can change the name. I'm going to show you can do this. If you wanted to, but don't worry about that right now. You do have to call it, you have to import it by its actual name. All right. Okay. So now you're kind of getting, hopefully, a little bit of why we use this syntax. This is the, which kind of default, or excuse me, which kind of export is React here? Yes, React is the default export. React is like the entire library is right here. What kind of export is use state? Yeah, the named export. So why would I grab that named export? Anyone know why I would do that instead of just saying, I could probably say react.useState. Yep. Why would I do that? Makes it a little bit easier, makes it a little bit cleaner. You know, there's a ton of other things that we can get from here. What's some other stuff? Component. But we only want to grab the certain things off of there. Okay, so for right now, we're going to grab only use state. And you only grab it where you want to. I mean, you only grab the things you want from it. We have to include the entire React library because that's where the JSX stuff comes from. Otherwise, we would probably not do that at all. But our whole JSX thing comes from React. So we have to grab it, the whole thing. It doesn't, yeah, never mind. Any questions right now on imports and exports? So we are going to be writing our own exports. This is going to happen, okay? And we're going to be writing our own imports. I don't want to answer that question with authority right now, Benedict, but JSX is the first place or React is the first place I ever saw JSX. And I believe React is the only place that uses JSX. So I'm going to say yes, but I might be wrong. But it's pretty convenient for React if they didn't use it or they didn't invent it. Okay. Questions about imports and exports. I know it's a little confusing. You're like, whoa, you had to put that whole thing down there. And I probably could have done. I don't know why this didn't work. Let's see if that'll work. Export default just does not like. Oh, I don't have to put that. I can just do this. Doesn't like const and doesn't like let. So I can just say export default this array, or if I wanted to name it, I would have to do that on a separate line. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually going to keep it like this because it's a default. It doesn't need a name, right? It doesn't need a name. It's the default. You can call it whatever you want. This needs a name, okay? We can call it whatever we want. Remember, we call it Dan's button values. We just give it the name we want, and it knows if it just has this that's not wrapped in curly brackets, that it's the export or the default from this file, okay? Yeah, when it's the default, you're just like, give me whatever the default is, I'm going to name it. And I've given it a name here, Dan's button values. I'm not sure what you mean by that. There can only be one default. Why do I give it a named property? I'm not sure. I have to give it some sort of name in order to use it in my file, but I didn't give it any name in here. If I wanted to, so the only time, and we'll see this, and I think this is getting a little too deep for this right now, but default, not const. I'm getting ahead of myself. The only time we really do it like this is if we want to use button values elsewhere in this file as well. Do I have to have line 4 on which one? On this file? Yeah, because that's a named export, right? So that we have to give it a name. That's not our default. That is a named export. So export, regular old thing, has to have a name. Export default does not have to have a name. And there can only be one default per file. Yep. Cool. All right. So as we can see, if we started getting, if we started building all of our components in one file, that file would get very large and very unwieldy very fast. Okay. So in React, we break our components into separate files. No, we don't say import default. We just say import, give it a name without anything from. Okay. So we don't say default. We could say this, but we're not doing that. That's deeper stuff. Okay. So let's go and start creating a folder hierarchy for our components. So most of the time you're going to see that we have a components folder. And then each of these folders are going to have either the whole component in it or groups of components. Okay. So we're going to say we want a counter group. Counter components. Okay. So this is inside of our components folder. We want that counter component. Inside of here, let's do a counter button.js. And then we're going to create another file called counter.js. All right. Everyone follow? So I created a components folder, and inside of this components folder, I'm going to have all of my components in here. Currently, I'm going to have one component, but and there is no real right way of doing this. This is a question that I get all the time, and it's a question I had when I was learning, like, well, how are we supposed to do it? In other languages, there is a defined structure of how you're supposed to keep these in folders. React and in JavaScript, there's not. Okay, so you're going to see different ways of doing it, but for the most part, you're going to see it done this way. All right. So let's go to our index. Let's grab our counter. Boop. I'm going to get rid of that. What's the first thing I need to do before I create any React file? Anyone know? Because we haven't actually done this yet. Yeah, we need to import React, actually. Every single React file, we need to import React from React. Oh, of course. Finger slip. And in fact, I know that I'm going to need use state, so I'm going to use state here as well. And then I've created this counter, and I'm actually going to get rid of those for a second. What's the last thing I need to do after I've created a component in a yes, I need to export. You are 100% going to forget to export. So you're going to mostly see your default exports happen at the bottom here. For components, 99.9% of the time, we're going to export default the entire component. Because why are we going to export default a component in a component file? Anyone know? Kind of the thinking behind that? Yeah, we're going to usually have one component per file. And that component is going to be the most important piece of data we're exporting from this file. We could export some other stuff, and you'll see, you know, in more advanced places, you'll export some other stuff from a file. But that component is like our main thing, right? And so that should be our default. Our main thing should be our default. Unless you want to like strictly adhere and make everyone use the name of this component as it appears in here, you can do that, but that's also more advanced and a stylistic choice rather than anything. But our component is the main piece of data, right? So let's come into, and now we want to import that component. I'm going to go components. How do I import that component? I want that counter component. Walk me through it. Need to import. Do I have to call this anything? No, because it's a default, right? But I'm going to call it counter so I don't confuse myself. Okay. I'm going to say from. And this is going to be the tricky part for those of us that aren't super used to the file system and traversing it using the terminal. This is going to be tricky. Where does the counter live? We can work backwards from this. So we know we want to call it counter.js. Let's call it .js right now. What file is this counter in? Counter.js. Let's work backwards. What file is counter.js in? I don't want the whole thing. What file is this in? It's in our counter component file, right? So I'm going to say counter component. What file is counter component in? Yep, it's in our components. What file is components in? It's in the source file, but also where we're trying to import it is also in the source file, right? So that's the same directory we're in, so we can just say that. And now we see that we got our counter imported. All right. So if that helps you work through it better, like, okay, cool, let me just go counter.js, counter component, where's my file at? Okay, it's in source. Once I get to source, I know that that's the same file I'm in. Sometimes we're going to have to go up a notch and down a notch, and we'll get there when we get there. But for now, that's how we can do it. Or you can just be like, whatever, I know that components, blah, blah, blah is in the file I'm in, and go from there. Okay. But work backwards if it helps you. All right. Cool. All right. We've created our first offsite component now. And in fact, I should actually do this all in app, but we're going to just deal with it as is. I'm actually going to get rid of this. All right. So we have our button component in here. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go into counter button. What's the first thing we do? Always. There's no shorthand, Benedict, for going to the bottom folder of the project. Sorry, you're going to have to write it out. It's annoying. Yes, we're going to import React from React. Are we going to need to use state? Nope. All right, we're not using state in the button here. Okay. What's the final thing we're going to do in this component for now? Export. Export default. I'm going to come into our counter and I'm going to import that button. And so since our counter button is in the same file that counter's in, I can just say counter button. And now I can put those in there as I'd like. All right. Any questions on that import, export, so and so? We don't. So the cool thing, Ryan, and we'll talk more about styling later. The cool thing about the CSS is we only have to import that one time. If we wrote separate CSS for the button in a separate file, we would import that there. Okay. Yeah, we'll write the text for the buttons in just a minute. But yes. Can you put the path in a variable for the import? I mean, yeah, but I don't really see a need for that because you're not ever going to call that more than once in a file. But yeah, it's just a string, right? I mean, it should work. I've never tried. Data string. You will do that in some really advanced Webpack stuff. Nope, doesn't work. Yeah, it should work, but I don't know why it doesn't. But all right. Beyond that, any questions on breaking this out now into its own component? Now, let's talk about it for a second too. Is that counter, you're not going to really use more than one counter, right? So why did we put counter in its own component? I mean, we could use more than one counter if we wanted to. We're certainly using more than one button. But why do we put counter in its own component? Honestly, it's just to make it much more clean. It's this clean separation of concerns is exactly it as well. Counter has its own state. It has its own thing. It's its own component on the screen, right? We've so far have only been building apps with one component in them. I don't know if we're going to get to the second one tonight, but we like to just contain logic for a thing in its own file. Okay, and then in index, I can just be like, cool, give me that counter. Boom, let me just throw it in there. All right. Yeah, it's self-contains. It's just this container that holds everything it needs. Okay. Counter button, as we can see, yeah, we're using that multiple times. All right. So it makes sense to have its own, component for it. But counter, yeah, it's really a stylistic thing, and it keeps our code much more clean and much more neat. And I know for a fact, as a developer, when I want to go mess with the counter, I go to the counter component file, and there it is. It's about that. Um, if you're working on a production React app, you are going to probably be working with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of components. Okay. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense seeing one component on the screen right now, but think about an app that contains hundreds of thousands of components. Having a proper organized file structure goes a long way. Having self-contained code goes another long way. Okay. Facebook, I don't even want to think about Facebook. They're crazy because even just facebook.com uses like a lot of different things. So yeah, cool. I love that, Blake. Yeah, are you like digging into the source code on stuff? Go dig into the source code on everything. Um, it's awesome. Start digging into stuff and start seeing how they build things and thinking about it. As we talked about components. Okay, before we go to break, let's talk about that pesky. No, let's take a break right now, and we're going to come back and talk about that pesky text that goes in there. Let's take 5. If you have any questions, we'll see you. Post them in Slack. If not, see you in 5. Yeah. All right. All right. Come on back. Let's get going because we've got a few things to cover in this next 30 minutes, and I don't want to go over as much as possible. So, Michelle, one thing I personally like the chaos because I have Slack on a separate screen, and I don't like interacting with it very much, and so it just kind of lets me. I have it more in my peripheral than anything. The more I have to interact with Slack, the slower the lectures go. That's just a personal preference of mine. You are going to have instructors that use Threads and Slido and a lot of different other tools. I apologize ahead of time for those that it's too chaotic for. I will look into a different way of doing it, maybe a questions channel or something like that. So sorry about that. It just helps me flow a little bit better with the things that are going on in class while we're working. Okay, so what is this? What is class name? What is it in the traditional HTML sense of things? Yeah, it's a class, but let's say I had an image in here. And I said image source equals something. What is the source in the traditional HTML sense of things? Yeah, it's called an attribute, right? And it tells us, what does an attribute do for an element? Anyone know what an attribute does? Like in a very high level way. I don't. Yeah, gives secondary info, adds details, gives the element some data, right? And in fact, you will see attributes called data attributes that look like this. It allows us to give the element some data. Okay. Now, React has taken this concept, and in fact, in Angular, you actually will have attributes called like ng loop or something like that, or for. They have their own attributes in Angular. In React, we call these props. Okay. They are called props, which stand for properties, obviously. Props are properties. And it allows us to supply our components with some extra data. Okay. Um, it allows us to give our components some extra data. So we are giving this div component, and it doesn't seem like a component to us right now, but in fact it is. React says it is. It creates a new element called a div, and then gives it some data. Okay, so class name is a prop on every single HTML JSX tag. Okay. We can also give our components their own custom props. We can call these props anything we want. Okay, so let's think about these buttons and think about what data they need. What two pieces of data do each of these buttons need? Yeah, it needs some text, right? We need to give it like a title, and we need to tell it what to do, right? Let's worry about the title part right now, the text part. Let's just call it text. We can call this whatever we want. The thing, and yeah, well, I'm not going to get that deep yet. We can call it whatever we want. Okay. Can we call it class or import or from or const? No, we can't call it any of those things. All right. We can't call it reserved keywords, but we can call it text. If I wanted to just call this button text, I could. Okay. So let's call it button text. And let's add some text in here. Add one. And it doesn't do anything yet. All right. But let's come through and give us all multiply 5. And we want to call this one reset, right? So let's think about it in a JavaScript sort of way. If I were to create a function called button, and I had some stuff that was in a const container equals document dot create element if, right? And then I said I wanted to say inner HTML or I'll just say container dot text content equals something, and I wanted to make this dynamic. How would I pass that data in to make that dynamic for each one, right? We've done this before. We've created like the whole shell of everything, but we've never, and we've passed just a couple of small changes in. So if we were to do this in plain old JavaScript, we would use an argument and a parameter, right? We would call this button text, right? And then I would say button text, and this is going to get mad at me because it's already something already called button. Let's go do button, whatever. And I would be able to pass some data in there and grab it and put it in where we wanted to, right? It doesn't matter because this is all getting deleted as is. So the same goes for our props. So our props are actually given to us in our function signature. And it's actually all of our props. So we can give our components as many props as we want, but they're all going to be contained in one argument. So all of our components are going to grab one argument, and we're going to call it props. Okay. So let's come in here and let's console log props. Before I look at this, does anybody know what data type props is? Props is convention. And I believe you might get yelled at if you don't use the word props by React. An array, an object, I like them. An array would make sense, right? Because it's like you have certain, a regular function, essentially your arguments are in an array-like object. But let's look at counter, and let's go something is something here. All right. I can do this is just gibberish. So we are not required to put our props in order. There's no specific order that we have to put our props in. Okay. So that kind of rules out array, because arrays have to have an order. But we are giving our props a name, and we are giving our props a value. So if we come in, we can see that props is an object. All right. And this object has that name that we've given it, and it has the value as a key value pair on an object. Okay, so I can say my name once again, and we'll see that now my name with Dan is on there. All right. Any questions about this right now? So now I'm able to pass data down to a component, a child component. And you might be thinking like, well, what are we going to do with this? And that's a great question. We'll just give them all the same prop. Look at that. Those are 3 different buttons with 3 different prop objects on them. I'm going to wait for some questions. This is what I wish I had known when I was first learning React. We don't need a loop through them. Each button has its own thing, right? This is a unique button. Each of these are unique buttons. So now each of these has access to their own props object. Yeah, totally, right? When we give a name of a prop and we give a value, When React calls that button function, it passes this object, it puts this in an object, and it passes it to an argument on that button. So these functions will all take one argument, and that is the props. Okay, and you could call this something else, like, let's call it foo. It'll probably get mad at me and say, like, you must call this props. No, it doesn't get mad at me, but don't do that. Call it props. Okay, remember, this is just an object, or it's just a function, and it's being passed a single argument, and in that argument are all of our props. Does that make more sense? Is that we're kind of getting that, right? I'm saying the key is button text, the value is add 1. The key on this button is button text, the value is multiply 5. The key is button text, the value is reset. Correct, Benedict. That's exactly what's happening. Ah, yes, Thomas. But before we do that, I want to make sure that this whole idea of props is understood. And remember, I can add as many props as I want. Oh my gosh, if I can type. And it'll add it to that object. Notice it's not on all of the objects. It's only the ones that I gave that props to. Essentially, this is allowing us to add arguments to our components. Okay. So instead of having to do it like in this new button thing where I would say new button, and I would say like add 1, right? It just allows us to add them right in line here. Okay. So yes, we can pass whatever data we want to a component. Yeah, letting us do it in a way that looks HTML. Letting us do it. I mean, HTML attributes are simply data given to that element. Props are simply data given to that component. Yeah, I could absolutely do that, Missy. Let's check it out. So we'll come into our button, and now, how do I use an object? Well, first of all, how do I use JavaScript in JSX? How do I use JavaScript in JSX? Curlies. I like it. Curlies. Curlies. Okay. What data type is props? Seasoned curlies. It's an object, right? We've already seen that it's an object, and you are free to console log props anytime you'd like to know what your props are. So it's an object. How do I use an object in JavaScript? Yeah, I'm going to call the object, which is called props. And then I want to call the name of the props, which is button text. And look at that. Instantly. So now, how reusable is this button component right now? This thing is super reusable right now, because now I can just call button, give it a button text prop, and give it whatever text I want into it, and it'll create a new button for me. Let's do it. Let's try it out. I'm going to create a new button, and instead of reset, I'm going to say new stuff. And there we go. We got a new stuff button now. Okay. It's pretty awesome. That button component is very, very reusable for me now. I can just pass it some data, and it does it for me. Any questions on passing that button some data? If I put the button text in this component, would that be reusable any longer? If I said add 1. Oh, you mean wrap it? Um, yeah, I could, but that's a prop called children, and we're not going to go there right now. But I could, you can, but that's kind of not what you do, and that's not what we're going to do right now. But yes, great question. There's a children props on every component as well, but we're not going to go there. Let's save that so we get a little bit cleaner. Okay. No, because it needs that props, right? It needs it. If you're not using props, hence right here, we're not using props in here, you don't need it. If you're using props, you need it. Okay. This is an argument. This is a JavaScript function, and React is passing a JavaScript object as the only argument of this function. That's it. When we console log our props, we can see that there is a key on there called button text, right? So what if I said button text? Now we'd see that we had the button text of all that. If I use JavaScript to say props.button text, same as right there, that is simply going to put that string in here, right? These curlies mean JavaScript, right? This means this is going to evaluate down to whatever that string is. Okay, cool. No worries. This is difficult. All right, this is pretty difficult to grasp because now we're using multiple files. We're flickering back and forth between two files. Like, oh, what did I call that prop? Button text. Oh, if it's not called button text on here, then it doesn't get added. Look at that, right? It has to be called. It has to maintain the consistency throughout. Okay. So it's not going to automatically do that for us. We called that button text. We named it that when we put it on the button here. We have to understand what we're looking for when it comes to this type of data. Okay. So it is getting confusing. It is getting much larger than, just writing a single component with some state. All right. One thing I want to tell you right now before I go to the next thing is props are read only. You cannot change props. Okay. Not in here. You can't change them. Can't change them. You can change them here as you pass them down, but in the component they're being used, you can't change them. Okay. Keep that in mind. And this is also something that's going to take a lot of you using it. It also takes a lot of planning, as you can see. That button, I have to know what prop it's even going to give it, right? I have to know the name of that prop. I have to know the data type of that prop. I have to know a lot of stuff about that before I can even start to write this button. So there is a lot more planning involved when it comes to React components. Okay. Wow, Benedict, thank you for asking. You can't use props to carry data back out of the function? Well, no and yes. So what's the second thing this button needs? Yeah, it needs our click, right? These buttons don't do anything right now, right? They don't do a dang thing. They need a click handler. One thing I want to make very clear before we get into this is if I call this on click here, this is not an on click as you would have on a regular HTML JSX element. Okay. On click, any props we add to these components, our own built components, are simply passed down as props. They do not have the intended behavior as they would on something that's a built-in element. Okay. So if I call this on click, we cannot expect this to just click and it to work. Okay. We have to use that prop in the button. That may sound confusing, and it might be confusing even after I explain it a little bit more, but you just got to keep that in mind. I'm going to write 3 functions. We're just gonna go set total. You have written these functions before. Const multiply. None of this should be new to you. Okay. All right. So we can call it on click if we want, but I think that makes it confusing. I think that makes it really confusing for us because we don't know why it's not working when we do this. We say, oh, why is it not working? I don't like calling it on click. All right. Second thing, what data type can props pass? Anyone know what kind of data a prop can pass down to its component? It would also be wise to think, what data type can I pass to a function? Right? Because all this is a function. We can pass objects, we can pass arrays, we can pass booleans, we can pass strings, we can pass functions, we can pass maps, we can pass symbols, we can pass anything. Any kind of data we can pass as a prop. Okay, anything, including functions. Okay, so let's create a new prop called button click. And if we're going to pass a variable, we need to use our JavaScript. We need to say, hey, this is JavaScript, and then we can pass that function in. Could I have written this entire function in here? Yeah, totally could have, right? We do it all the time with onClick, and onClick really is just a prop, okay? But it's just got some default behavior. So, just like our onClick, we are going to pass these functions. Apply, reset. Okay, let's go. And once again, we're just gonna do props. I'm gonna save that. And let's look at what our props now are in each of these buttons. So it's an object. We have our button text, and then we have a button click, which is equal to this function, okay? So this is just like passing a callback to a function. It's just like that, all right? We can pass callbacks to functions. You can do that, right? You wouldn't be here right now if you couldn't do that, if you couldn't pass a callback to a function. We can pass a callback to as a prop as well. That's all we're doing. So look at all these. We have some text and we have multiply. All right. So just like with our props up button text, how do we get access to this button click? Luis, yes, I could. Absolutely. How do we get access to button click? Yep. Now, no matter what button click equals, right? In this first button, it equals add one function. In the second button, it is going to equal the multiply function. And in the third button, it's going to equal the reset function. No matter what it equals, it's going to be called button click. Remember, if you just think of these components as functions, button is a function, and props is just an argument passed to the button, okay? You can pass callbacks to functions. You can pass callbacks as props, all right? Let's go look at what's going on here. Let's take a little bit more of a look, and let's also look to see that it works. Okay. Let's see. Essentially, what's happening is this. We're obviously passing the text. We are essentially, let's just say this. You said, could we just put the function in there as add one? Yep. So we are. So that is the same as doing that, right? Passing a function as the second argument. They're not ordered. They're in an object rather than an array. So we can name them. But that's all we're doing. When it comes into here, it's going to be given that prop, and essentially it's going to say this. And it's going to set the total on the state in the other. If I said add one, what would happen? The same as doing it on our click handler. We have an infinite loop, okay? So we can't call the function. And remember, let's look at what this function is. It's its own anonymous function, right? So if you feel better writing this function inside of that, by all means, go for it. If you're like, I know how to write it on click, and I don't know how to do this, by all means, write it in, straight in. Just like an on click. Okay. This makes things a little cleaner when we create variables and then just pass the variable in. Passing the function. Yeah, it's callback. Yep. All right. So we cannot change the state of the counter within this button component, but we can pass a function down that changes it. This, remember, let's think back real quick to our JavaScript stuff. This is a function scoped, right? This is all in function scope, okay? Remember our closures, this is created within this scope. So when I pass it down, it knows where it was created. And when I call it, it knows to call it properly. All right. This is probably one of the most difficult parts of React. So if you are like super confused right now, that is the norm. All right. If you 100% get this, you've probably have worked with React a lot in the past. But if you're very confused, that's very, very, very normal. Okay. So we really just need to think about props as passing arguments to functions. As long as we can think about them like that, then we can start to connect the dots a little bit, right? We're just passing arguments to our function. That's all it is. Just because it uses a little bit different syntax with this whole props object, that's what we're doing, okay? Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of those that you have to, that you're going to have to use a lot in order to really start to get the flow, because you have this weird flow, right? You have this, like, oh, cool, I've got this parent component with these smaller components, and then I'm going to like pass data down to them, right? And then there's going to be a button, and when it clicks, it's going to like change something up here. This is a very like early, we're using props to pass data down, and we're using props to manipulate data up here, okay? Props are just, these are just arguments that we're passing to our function. That's all it is. And we know how to write functions. We know how to call arguments and functions. We know how to use callbacks. We know how to use data that's passed to functions. That's essentially what a prop is. That's all it is. I try not to draw as much as possible because I'm not a great drawer, but I'm not great at drawing. But yes, I can absolutely do that, and I'm a visual learner as well. So there is also, let's see, there's this article. I don't know how good it is right now for you. Because it uses a lot of class syntax. If you just look at I'll share it with you. Don't worry about the class syntax stuff. Okay, please, please, please. We are, as of this year, don't have to use class components anymore. But that's how we used to have to do things. So right now, are there any questions on this? Yes, Benedict. That's the main draw of hooks. I did use onClick. Right there. Because when I give a button, when I give a component a prop, this will not be interpreted as an event. It will never be interpreted as an event. Any component that I give props to will only be interpreted as props. So if I say onClick and give this some thing, and I click that, I'm never going to see that in here because this is not interpreted as a click event. You can see it is interpreted as a prop. Okay. I can only use those events on what we would consider HTML elements. Nothing is an attribute on a component. Keep that in mind. If you have an uppercase, none of this is our attributes. Okay, these are all props. If you have a lowercase, all of these are attributes. So that's a good way to keep it in mind. Yes, Andrew. So that is why every resource on the internet uses class components in React, and we use functional components because we are like cutting edge, awesome school, and we use hooks. And hooks are the way of React moving forward, and they're all functional components. So you are going to see a lot of class component stuff. We're not getting into class components until the next unit, but trust me when I say that hooks are amazing and they will make you love React way more. If we were using classes right now, you would all be so much more confused than you are currently. So keep that in mind. Hooks are not brand new. They're new as of 2019. Nope, doesn't, but you can't use hooks in classes. So, okay, everyone. That's it. That's props. Remember, props are data. They are parameters. They are the arguments that we pass to functions. That's all they are. We are giving some of our components some extra data to work with. And then we're going to see, and we can already see that React, of course, come on. I don't care about that. React updates the UI based on the data we have. It reacts to changing data automatically for us. It's the best. So go take a break, go walk around the block or something, clear your head, come back and start playing around with props because they make the world go round. It makes using React possible. Okay. So thanks for joining me tonight, everyone. Have a good night, and I'll see you on Monday. Good night.